Most people look at the wealth and power of the United States and point to a few obvious advantages: two oceans acting as natural moats, endless fertile farmland, deep reserves of coal and oil, but raw materials can be extracted and armies can be drained. Geography alone does not produce multi-generational global dominance. Beneath the factories and the stock tickers lies a hidden, intricately engineered machine. It's an architecture of legal innovations, financial plumbing, and monetary mechanics assembled piece by piece over 230 years. This system does not rely on luck. It was designed to convert raw human ambition into liquid capital, enforce contracts with absolute certainty, and compel every nation on Earth to finance American prosperity through an inescapable currency loop. We start in the summer of 1790. The young republic had won its revolution, but it was functionally bankrupt. The states owed millions to European bankers and unpaid war veterans. State currencies were worthless. There was no gold or silver coin to fund commercial enterprise. Alexander Hamilton looked at this mountain of ruin and saw the raw material for a financial engine. Instead of paying off the debt and forgetting it, Hamilton proposed consolidating chaotic state obligations into a single interest-bearing federal bond backed by customs duties. By ensuring these bonds paid regular interest in gold, he created a universally trusted financial asset. A merchant in New York could now use a treasury bond as collateral to buy a cargo ship or build a textile mill. The debt was monetized. It became the fluid bloodstream on American commerce. Hamilton created a class of domestic and foreign investors whose personal fortunes were tied to the survival of the United States government. If America failed, their bonds went to zero. He welded the self-interest of wealthy capital holders directly to the sovereignty of the state. Sovereign credit was only the first gear. A financial system needs a legal framework that protects private investment from political interference. Under Chief Justice John Marshall, the Supreme Court ruled that corporate charters were private contracts protected from state seizure. Marshall also dismantled state trade barriers, creating the largest internal common market in human history. To supply a continent-sized market, businesses needed to aggregate capital without exposing investors to catastrophic personal risk. In 1837, Connecticut introduced the General Incorporation Law. Under this law, creditors could only seize corporate assets. The personal savings and homes of individual shareholders were protected by a legal shield. Another quiet shift occurred on the workshop floor. The federal government funded the creation of interchangeable parts for military weapons. Instead of a craftsman filing a single custom musket for days, unskilled workers could stamp out hundreds of identical metallic components every day. That relentless standardization spread to consumer goods and eventually to the physical landscape itself, when 13,000 miles of railroad track were shifted to a uniform gauge in a single weekend. Managing these giants required a new administrative intelligence. Railroad executives invented the modern corporate organizational chart. They separated ownership from management and pioneered cost accounting, calculating the exact fraction of a cent it took to move a ton of freight over a single mile. The combination of legal capital shields and standardized industrial metrics created a machine capable of producing at a scale no European empire could match. In the first half of the 20th century, the great empires of Europe marched into two devastating wars. To pay for the material demands of industrial combat, Allied powers liquidated foreign assets and shipped massive amounts of gold bullion to the United States. While European factories were pulverized, the continental United States expanded its industrial base until it accounted for more than half of the world's manufacturing output. In July 1944, American policymakers dictated the terms of the post-war monetary order at Bretton Woods. Because the U.S. held the gold in the factories, it established the dollar as the sole anchor of international finance. Every other major currency was pegged directly to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold. The Marshall Plan functioned as a masterstroke of systemic self-interest. By injecting billions of grant dollars directly into European treasuries, The U.S. financed the reconstruction of foreign infrastructure while simultaneously creating a dependent customer base for American exports. Global trade requires secure oceans. The United States Navy deployed its carrier strike groups to guarantee freedom of navigation through every strategic maritime choke point on the planet, not just for American ships, but for the merchant vessels of every nation on Earth. This security umbrella triggered an explosion of international commerce, but this global trade network was an illusion of independence. It was entirely underwritten by American naval power and settled in American currency. By the late 1960s, the system hit a mathematical wall known as Triffin's dilemma. For global trade to expand, the world needed an ever-growing supply of dollars. But printing more paper dollars meant the volume of currency globally exceeded the physical gold reserves in U.S. vaults. French President Charles de Gaulle began converting France's surplus dollar reserves into physical gold, dispatching warships to load crates of bullion from New York and transport them back to Paris. As foreign claims skyrocketed, a run on the United States gold window reached emergency proportions. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon permanently severed the dollar from physical gold. The world entered an uncharted system where currencies floated freely against fiat paper, backed only by the decree of the U.S. government. Floating paper could not maintain global dominance on its own. The dollar needed a new anchor. In 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and Treasury Secretary William Simon executed a diplomatic deal in Riyadh. The United States would provide the Saudi monarchy with an absolute security guarantee. In return, Saudi Arabia agreed to price and sell its oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. Because oil was priced in dollars, every government was forced to maintain massive reserves of American currency. They earned these dollars by exporting physical goods to the American market. They then sent those dollars to the Middle East to buy crude oil. Finally, the oil exporters took their surplus petrodollars and invested them right back into United States Treasury bonds. This offshore dollar network created a self-reinforcing international demand distinct from the oil trade. The United States prints paper at almost zero cost, receives high-quality manufactured goods in exchange, and uses the recycled profits to fund its own government deficits. This is a financial perpetual motion machine. The reach of this system extends into the digital plumbing of global commerce. Every time an international wire transfer moves across borders, that dollar transaction must clear through a correspondent bank located inside the United States, utilizing the Federal Reserve settlement systems. If a financial transaction touches the American banking system for even a microsecond, the United States Treasury asserts legal jurisdiction. When a foreign bank facilitates a dollar transaction with an entity targeted by American sanctions, the Treasury simply threatens to cut off the offending bank from the dollar clearing system. In 2014, the French banking giant BNP Paribas paid an $8.9 billion penalty because the alternative, being severed from the American financial grid, meant immediate corporate liquidation. The United States operates its financial grid as a strategic panopticon. It is a strategic weapon that does not require a single military deployment. Today, this interlocking architecture faces significant challenges. The expansion of the BRICS coalition and the rise of bilateral currency settlements have led many to predict a shift away from the dollar. Nations are experimenting with local currency oil deals and building alternative payment networks to challenge SWIFT. Displacing the dollar requires the total replication of its underlying infrastructure. A challenger must maintain an independent judiciary that enforces property rights impartially. It must be willing to run permanent balance of payments deficits to supply the rest of the world with reserve currency. And it must possess the global naval capability to secure the oceanic trade corridors of the entire planet. The skyline of Manhattan and the factories of the Midwest are merely the visible monuments of this power. The power itself lives in the unseen plumbing, the legal clauses, the naval patrols, the clearinghouse servers, and the sovereign promises governing the financial bloodstream of the world.